Big lies versus big facts, combating disinformation in our elections. This is the partnership with Common Power Future and Rantt, my company. And we're happy to, bring all this information to you. And we're going to be, spend the next few weeks together here. Let's see. Okay, great. My internet's cooperating today. All right. So just some housekeeping stuff. If you're liking what you're hearing, obviously tweet out what you hear and some of the information you're getting with hashtag big facts so we can track the conversation. We can all stay in the loop. Join Common Power's Mobilize community at commonpower.io. It's a really cool, intimate community experience where you can keep up with all CP events and get into discussions. Obviously, there's advocacy work that CP is doing, and Action Academy, which is what I spoke at over the summer. Sign up for that if you're Gen Z, a young aspiring organizer, someone interested in this stuff, because there's a lot of perks. You get to learn a lot and you get paid. So you can't really beat it. You're gonna have a great experience. The people are cool, community's dope. Definitely look into that after, and obviously follow us and engage on social media. So you already met a bunch of our ambassadors. We got Angie, we have Kyra, we have Sam, who couldn't be here today, but he'll be here obviously moving forward. Out from South Carolina, he's awesome. We have Elizabeth, Mandy, and Blossom. These are our CP ambassadors. They're going to be with us throughout this lecture series, throughout this campaign. Really, they've been working to recruit people to come to the lecture series, doing disinformation work on their own campuses, and it's been really great. And I think you're going to be able to engage with them a lot during this, and reach out to them, reach out to us. Here's where you can hit them up on social media, about how to get involved with CP and other work. So we can keep it moving. So, okay, this is what we're covering. We're going to be, over the next 3 weeks, diving into disinformation 101, really breaking down how we got here, where we're going, and analyzing this unprecedented era we find ourselves in. And then while today we're focusing on kind of the nitty gritty, how it works, all that in-depth stuff, and it'll be interactive, I promise. So I'm not just talking at you, it'll be fun. And then next week, we start talking more about the tactics, how we combat this ourselves and our communities. And then in the third part is when we go and get into legislative strategies. We get in the nitty gritty of some lobbying, grassroots stuff, who Jamie Lynn and her, sort of advocacy team here at Common Power will be joining us for that. It's going to be a lot of fun. Stay for all the parts, get involved. We'll have Twitter spaces in between, but we'll get to some of that later. All right, so let's dive in. Part one, how did we get to this disinformation age with an era where it seems you don't know what to believe, and it's hard to really keep up and hard to maintain your own sanity a lot of the time. Sasha said I maintained my sanity during the Trump presidency, but it was really a close call. Analyzing that much disinformation can be tough. And that's why we're here. We want to break down how you can get through this wild era. So we're going to start with a little question here, a little poll. On a scale of 1 to 10, how much do you think Gen Z's voting behavior has been impacted by disinformation or is currently impacted? So just go ahead and send that into the chat. Everybody go through and list on a scale of 1 to 10, how much you think Gen Z is actually being influenced here. Okay. All right. A lot of high numbers. A lot of high numbers. Keep it coming in for a second, and then, yeah, I mean, a lot of the time, some Gen Zers are influenced by this, but honestly, though, it's a little bit more of an optimistic outcome from what we've seen in the data, luckily. From what we're seeing, it looks like Gen Z is a more resilient generation to disinformation than any other generation thus far. And it's probably because of the native digital atmosphere Gen Zers have grown up in, and it's really Gen Zers and young millennials too, that are the driving force behind this. Because if we look at the midterms, right, there was a lot of good that happened when it came to America's resilience to disinformation. Every 2 years, we get a check to see if how resilient we truly are to disinformation, and whether or not we're equipped. And this past few election cycles, we've seen that it's gone pretty well. The election deniers, 13 races, 6 key battlegrounds, all the election deniers lost for those races. This would have been super consequential for 2024. And what we're finding is Gen Z showed up, turned out, and they voted down the big lie in big numbers. Second highest midterm turnout since aside from 2018. And it is another key part to this is that it was in disproportionate numbers we see with election deniers like Carrie Lake in the election in Wisconsin. Gen Z provided so many net votes to the candidates that weren't election deniers that they were instrumental in beating the election deniers. So they took down the big lie in a big way. And it was inspirational. And the turnout was really the second largest since before pretty much all of these Gen Zers were born. And it's really unreal. So let's go on to this next thing. Now we're going to get into some of the nitty gritty here. We're going to get into some of the brass tacks of how this works and what can we identify. So throwing it to you, what is the difference between misinformation and disinformation? And if someone wants to say it and raise their hand and speak, it's on you. We want this to be a discussion. We don't want to just be me talking at you for hours and hours. We want to go back and forth. So does anyone want to volunteer, raise their hand in the Zoom to explain the difference or take a shot at it? No hand raised? Oh, I just gave the answer away for a second. But okay, so no hand raisers. All right. Intent. Okay, we got it in the Zoom chat too. All right, we got Angie with intent. Anyone else want to throw something into the Zoom chat? Say their take on it?
Mandy raised her hand. Go ahead, Mandy.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry to take you away from the chat. I usually connotate misinformation with kind of a mistake because the person may not know this when incorrect information, but then it's really just usually an accident. And like as the chat mentioned, they usually don't intend for harm to happen. But with disinformation, the spread of the information is acted with a malicious intent. I know before you mentioned kind of like bad actors usually, and usually disinformation is utilized by like I just mentioned like bad actors.
That is spot on. That is the difference. And it's outlined right here. Yes, knowledge that is false. Christina's right. Angie's right. Intent. And Mandy's right. It is about the intention to mislead, because misinformation isn't always sent with the intent. It could just be something as simple as someone sharing an article that says Drake's about to drop an album next week when he's not. Very innocent misinformation. Or it could be something like the election was stolen, or something like the election day is a different time than it would otherwise be. And it can range from damaging to innocent, but it's about the intent. Disinformation is the deliberate spread of intentionally deceptive information with the intent to mislead. And a lot of the time it's sent with a mission and an explicit goal to undermine democracy, influence voting behavior, and create a result that is advantageous to the person or entity that is sending this information. So everybody's right. Now we're going to do another question here. Where were modern disinformation tactics first pioneered in the 20th century? So in the 1900s. Does anyone want to take a stab at like where kind of some of these modern tactics kind of became systemic, and what regime, what country? Anyone want to raise their hand and take a guess or throw something in the Zoom chat? Okay, we've got some good answers here. It's looking like, honestly, there's truth to all of these answers. I mean, like at the beginning, it goes to William here. These are amazing answers. It goes to William. Germany and the Nazi Party was when it really became a systemic force, this propaganda. So the Ministry of Propaganda, Joseph Goebbels and Adolf Hitler, of course, began to create this system of using and weaponizing disinformation for the needs of their regime. And then it got further pioneered in Russia, in Soviet Russia. So Stacey, you're right too. In the Soviet era, during the Cold War especially, they started to really implement more modern techniques of disinformation with the, as newspapers began to proliferate more, as there began to be television, and it really took on new roots. So right now we're really looking at kind of the history of this, which I'm about to touch on the next slide, because yes, from North Korea to news, radio, newspaper, all this evolution, but it began to take hold there. The American word disinformation is widely seen to be derived from the Soviet word, and everyone is right here. Everyone has great answers. So what we're going to do now is dive into some of the tactics that these people did pioneer, and it really it's pretty systemic, and there's kind of a very similar and repeated set of tactics and almost an order of tactics that we see this disinformation take form. First is conspiracy theories that are usually derived from some kind of kernel of truth, some kind of underlying suspicion or some kind of doubt in the system that's then taken and created and repeated over and over and over again. And it takes advantage of the illusory truth effect, in which when you're being repeated something to you over and over again, you're eventually going to believe, oh, there might be some truth to this. I keep hearing it over and over again. And then if you hear it over and over again from sources that you trust, such as a news anchor or a politician, then you're hearing it repeated over and over again. And then you're beginning to hear it repeated from sources you trust. We're seeing that in anchors and certain anchors, people who call themselves anchors. And we're seeing disinformation be spread in that nature. And then once these narratives are kind of set and baked in, they're amplified by by fake activity, bots on social media, which we've seen over the years. So before we go to the next slide, what is the tactic that you've all most seen used in the last few elections? You can put in the number. They're all labeled by numbers here. Do you want to throw them into the chat and kind of showcase which tactic you believe you've seen the most? Okay. Yep. Really good answers. Because a lot of these work in tandem with one another, and a lot of threes too. We're seeing a lot of threes. That gets into this disinformation industrial complex that I know Larcy often talks about as well, where there's a profit motive behind the disinformation. And as there's profit motives, there's new technologies, new platforms that enable it to proliferate faster. And then that further increases the profits, attention, and it's just a never-ending cycle that we hope to end, which is why we're here. Anyone want to expand upon this, or have any questions so far? You want to raise their hand? I know I've been talking for a little while. Anyone have any questions or any thoughts so far that they want to broach? You can raise your hand in the Zoom. I'm scanning the room to see if there's anybody. Okay. Christina?
Yeah, sure. So I put in the chat there that I think that it's the answer to this question is kind of dependent on how much media you consume. for you and I and a couple other people that I see, Zora and Mark, and I think Janet's here too. We consume a lot of media. So I think that we're all likely to see a lot more of that fake amplification. Whereas if you're somebody who just watches news at night or just checks headlines in the morning, you're more likely to answer with number one or number two, right? And if you're not consuming much media at all, then likely number three, I would think, because if you don't consume much media, when you do consume it, it's a very trusted source to you.
Yeah.
And then that trust is a lot more easily exploited.
Exactly. And on that note of exploited trust, we got a question from William here of, why can politicians say whatever they want without consequences? And, if he does the same thing as a student, he could be reprimanded or expelled. That's the question of our decade, William, is why are these people of power being held to such lower standards than us in our day-to-day lives? And it's because a lot of the time they're being rewarded by this disinformation industrial complex, whether it is the news orgs or the social media platforms that incentivize this behavior, whether it's the algorithms that further their line, but most importantly, that it's the polarization we've seen and the voter bases that enable them to remain in power, which we're going to touch on next. But that's a great point, William, because if you were to pull a George Santos and claim you were all these things you weren't in order to try to get into college, you would have already you'd been kicked out. You would have been expelled already. Meanwhile, George Santos is over there in Congress, just remaining in power because of all of these systems that we're about to discuss today. So great questions, everybody. This is great stuff. Keep them coming throughout. And of course, as we're going, if you have any other questions that rise up, throw them into the chat. I'll answer them when I can. And also raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And we want to hear from a lot of people, especially, those who are aspiring organizers and other people here. So, but we're going to move on from now. Hold on, we got another question here in the chat. How many of these tactics are specific corners of the internet or certain social media sites? So some people would only come into contact with them if they use Facebook or social media. So yeah, some of these tactics, it's like what Christina was saying. It depends on how you consume your media. If you're consuming social media a lot, you'll run into the fake amplification. And exactly, and that's how algorithms factor in. Exactly. If you're on Facebook or if you're on TikTok, for example, yes. And it depends on which corner of the internet you're in. And what we're starting to see with algorithms, though, some of these tactics are starting to bleed into the more of the mainstream. We've seen tactics that are pioneered in some of these extremist echo chambers being used by mainstream people on TikTok, for example, or on Twitter or Facebook. And, a lot of it is just, there's very online people that use these tactics more often than those who aren't online. And it really depends on which side of which corner of the internet you find yourself within. And what we're seeing is that these tactics are starting to repeat, and they're starting to have a kind of similar flow to them over and over again. But yeah, these are excellent questions. I'm going to jump to the next slide so we can dive into to answer some of these overall questions of why can people get away with this? How did we even get here? And a lot of it is due to the electorate, what happened to the electorate over the last several decades. And what we have here is, before the 80s, there was this thing called the Fairness Doctrine. And essentially, news orgs were required to be neutral and, present multiple sides. There was the big three. There was NBC, ABC, CBS, and then there was just the inability. There was those three that would deliver the same content essentially for a fixed set of time every night. Everyone's kind of consuming the same information. You have these newspapers far less diversification of views, far less diversification of information. Here comes Ronald Reagan in the 80s, Fairness Doctrine is repealed. We then have a lot of widespread views, to say, to put it kindly, spread throughout the 90s. And we have partisan talk radio really exploded. Rush Limbaugh, we have Fox News, we have a lot of these polarizing content that's being sent out. And then we begin to see these echo chambers form. And we begin to see that not everyone's on the same page because we're no longer getting the same information. Then going into the 2000s, we began to see these blogs that began to take off and the age of the internet explode. Now there's even more areas to get information, fewer gatekeepers, and there is now this disinformation industrial complex. There's more room for it to grow. And then we have the social media era, which a lot of us grew up in. And it's this rise in which this digital ad model powered by algorithms created by people that did not anticipate any of this. They thought they were just creating apps for their friends to meet or for, and then here they come being the #1 source of news for billions of people. And without regulation and with this ad model incentivizing endless attention, this is what we end up getting. This space in which information runs rampant, virtually unchecked for a lot of the earlier time. It wasn't until some of the Cambridge Analytica and some of the Russian interference in 2016 that we began to see people taking it seriously, but a lot of us saw it before. We all saw our conspiracy theorists, uncle, posts on Facebook well before 2016, and we knew disinformation was being spread. So that's how we got to this place. And it's really been one big, it's a combination of the polarized electorate combined with social media that is creating more widespread, essentially silos where people are essentially being given their individualized reality that can be reinforced by these algorithms. And it's hard to get, that's why it's hard to break through. And before I go on to this one, there's a lot covered here. Anyone have any questions they want to throw into the Zoom chat, or any thoughts or any things that popped up? I want to hear from some new people in here. Do we got anyone in the chat or anyone that wants to raise their hand and ask a specific question or something here that really stood out to them that may have been eye-opening? Okay. All right, well, then I'll just keep it moving. We'll go on to this next one. And here we have the culmination of all of this. We have this eruption. This social media era created this. And like Stacey's saying here in the chat, there's always been disinformation, but now it's being questioned. And a lot of it's being questioned because of what we saw, especially on January 6th. And we're seeing, you can draw a line from it, from what happened in 2016, these exploitive tactics that were used to send out fake news. They were spreading disinformation systemically through the Internet Research Agency in 2016, got hundreds of millions, almost 200 million engagements on Instagram. And a lot of the time they'd impersonate Americans. They had this one thing where they were creating Black accounts of like young Black people that just hated Hillary Clinton. They had this whole really well thought out system that they put into place. And then they use all those tactics we discussed, the repetition, the fake amplification especially. And then we got to 2020 where all of us were locked down, stuck at our houses, and Trump was among the individuals who used some of the tactics that he saw was successful in 2016 to then further his own ends. And a lot of that was repetition of the big lie, which there was a lot of people within the political sphere that did that. A lot of allies, some lawmakers that were pushing this. And it created this culmination, this explosive insurrection that we saw on January 6th that was really just kind of visual, visceral representation of what disinformation can do on the ground with real people, how they can be drawn out to do something that would seem unimaginable to an average American, to assault the Capitol. And that's what all of this led up to. That is what all of this led up to. So actually, before we move on from this, we just covered like decades of history. Just went through a lot. Does anybody have any questions or anything that stood out or any remarks really that they want to discuss over this decades that we just went through? Okay, Christina, you can.
Thank you. This was something that occurred to me the other day, as one of my students had mentioned it in a persuasion class, reminded me of Newt Gingrich's cassette tapes. And what was really interesting, I'm really glad you included Reagan in that last slide, because that was around the time there were key words, and that included lies and radical left and all of those words that we heard on repeat constantly over the last 6 or 7 years. And it's fascinating to me that that was kind of a directive from a particular group of people in the 1980s.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. There's a lot of various political figures that would use really these tactics, and they'd put it in a system, and they'd put it in a way, frame it in a way that would trickle down and be enforced at the ground level by a lot of the people that they would deploy. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and move on to this next thing. And I swear we're gonna get some more interactive stuff here. We just had to cover this meat. We had to get through this really beefy section so we could all understand the history. And as Kyra says here, seems it's getting worse and creating more opinions or taking over from real facts. And that's really what's happening here. It's as technology is kind of escalating here, and as we're getting to this place where there's really been this ascension of disinformation along with social media, now with technology really expediting this, it brings me to this next question. What does everybody think is the next big tech innovation that you think could pose another big disinformation threat here? Does anyone want to throw into the chat or step up and? Yep, got some answers in here. Yes, exactly. Everybody's right. AI, chatbots. That's what we're seeing here. There was actually a story this week. Yep. Huya, you're right. Victoria, you're right. Yep. William, Annika, Willow, all of you. Amber, you're spot on. This is correct. Does anyone actually want to jump up and expand upon that? Some of the people who answered in the chat. Does anyone want to give it a shot before I go and try to explain it myself? Because everyone is engaging with ChatGPT now. Would love to hear from you. Either Puya, Victoria, Annika, Willow, or Amber. If one of you would like to raise your hand as to why you think it's a threat. Okay.
I can go. I mean, it's a really cool program and a really cool thing to try out and experience. But at the same time, I was watching CNN and it was telling about how many people are pushing the boundaries of to what extent they can get kind of like misinformation or things that are not really fact-checked from ChatGPT. And even though it's a really cool program, really interesting, I feel like if it's just like open to public and millions of people are using it every day, and it's growing as well, but there's no set of regulation in place to guide this tool, this amazing tool, then it can become super problematic. And that's what we've seen to a good degree with social media, but the way that ChatGPT is growing, it's just unprecedented. So it needs even more guidance.
That's spot on. You know, as it's really exciting tech that will do a lot of great things, but at the same time, without guardrails, just like social media, there's not going to be, you know, you have to emphasize ethical AI. You have to listen to the experts on this, and you know, you have to implement the systems and put them in place at the ground level at the beginning of this emerging technology, and don't wait until a decade down the line, like social media did, before you implement any safeguards. So you're spot on. And I want to ask Mandy, do you want to expand upon what you said in the chat about how you've been debating about how ChatGPT is immoral in your philosophy class?
Yeah, sure. During the time when we were talking about this, we were just learning about Immanuel Kant, and then we just talked about categorical imperatives. But basically, we just kept talking about how when you do this, you're just basically lying because you're lying that this is your work. Usually, people like students like to use it to submit like essays that they don't want to write or like that scenario. In this under Immanuel Kant, we just have to imagine what someone does is universal law. So we have to imagine a world where, for example, everyone submits false papers because they don't want to do the work. They let something else write it. And usually people don't even look at what ChatGPT writes specifically. They just copy and paste it, then submit it, for example. And just how like out of control that is. Also how kind of scary it is for some people, for example, in my class, when they ran it, they're like, oh, like that's better work than I could ever produce, and that's such.
No, you're right. You know, especially when it comes to these presentations you're giving at school, or these essays, it can be, I was playing with it myself, and some of it's convincing. Some of it's like, oh, like especially you can tell it to write in a specific voice, in a specific artist or writer's voice. You know, there's some innocent things and fun things you can do with it, and there's also the cheating aspect in school where it could create this dishonesty where it kind of is creating people who are just editors rather than writers. You can throw something into ChatGPT, and that's what we could see with disinformation. Is we could see what we saw as a study that was written about in the New York Times just this week. I think just yesterday or today it was on the cover. And what we're seeing is researchers at NewsGuard, essentially, as you can see with this example here on the slide, they said, you know, talk to me about the Parkland shooting in Alex Jones's voice, and it regurgitated absolute disinformation right back to NewsGuard. It was really stunning stuff, and you can imagine what this technology could have done if it was in the hands of, let's say, Russia in 2016. They would have had to hire 1/4 the staff, 1/5 the staff to write that fake news content. You could ask ChatGPT, throw this out for me, you edit it, you send it out. And in that New York Times article, they found that there was really startling amount of disinformation. And sometimes ChatGPT would give people new lies to add on to their ones that they're requesting already. It was really stunning to the researchers. And let's see, Puya, I see you raising your hand again. And also correct me if I'm wrong in the pronunciation. I hope I'm getting it correct with Puya, but you can go ahead and ask your question.
Oh no, Puya is perfect. Also, I was reading, I forgot which source it was, but they were talking about a news source that was using AI to write actual like news articles, and apparently after they were kind of caught, they were like, oh, this was an experiment to see if people notice. I don't know how much I trust that, but apparently it had a lot of false information, and people were like, we noticed. So yeah, it's already all over.
Yeah, it's really being used all over it because people are that's the thing about it. Some people might try to use it even innocently to enhance their own work or get additional context, but it's really an unreliable, You have to fact check it yourself, because I've been playing a lot with it. And one thing I will say that is semi-promising with ChatGPT specifically, whereas I'm not 100% sure where the engineers at the other at Google and some of these other entities, whether they'll do the same thing, but ChatGPT is starting to put some guardrails in place, and it seems to be learning from first time I spoke to it, I asked it to explain to me which was the worst president in history, and it told me it's it basically gave me answers and was being very specific and sometimes partisan even. And then I asked it again this week, the same question, and said it doesn't dive into controversial figures. And I asked about specific controversial figures and it wasn't diving in. So it seems the AI is beginning to learn. But those guardrails, that's just one chatbot. That's not, you need a system and you need, hopefully, which I doubt, you need legislation and you need rules of the road for this AI. You need to be able to set things in place so that there's regulation and that's not going to be a free for all. And that didn't work in the social media era, and it wouldn't work with chatbots either. And we're going to be talking a lot about that in part 3 with Jamie Lynn here, and it's going to be great. So definitely stay for the whole lecture series, because we're going to cover all, like, this is we're just talking about the problem, identifying it. Next session, we get into how you can personally combat it. And then part 3, we're going to talk about how we can combat it at the big picture level. So we're going to jump into a little exercise here. And I promise I'm not trying to hypnotize you. This is not an Illuminati induction chart. This is just a little exercise we're about to do here. I'm going to ask you to, everybody, if you can send in how many triangles you think are in this picture. And some of you remember from Action Academy. So what we're gonna do is we'll wait 10 seconds. So since some of you saw it from Action Academy, I'll just wait a little bit. And then when I say go, everybody sends in the amount of triangles that they think they saw into the chat, okay? All right, we're gonna wait a little bit, give you some time to think, and then we'll try. All right, let's just give it a shot, what you've counted so far, okay? Everybody send in how many triangles you think are in this image. Some good answers in here. Okay. All right. Well, Kyra, Mandy, Blossom, Amber, Willow, you are right. There's 0. There are no triangles here at all. Triangles have 3 sides. And in order for a triangle to exist, you need 3 connecting sides. And here, none of the sides are connecting. There's not one triangle here. You can see how there could be, but that's what happens. Our mind completes the image. It's almost a survival instinct bias. It's for us to anticipate threats and anticipate what could come. Your mind tries to complete the picture here based off prior information, based off context, based off your own bias, your own implicit biases. Because obviously these sides are going to touch, right? I mean, look at them. They look, yeah, they could be 8, there could be 9, there could be 15, you know, but that's just not the case. You have to go with the information you have. And while especially we're dealing with this new rise, and it's going to be even harder to tell disinformation from real information here with these chatbots, you have to be able to check yourself and discern whether or not you're jumping to a conclusion and trying to complete the picture. So this is actually an image that's used to scan, not scan, but screen jurors in New York. And it's given as a way to kind of like teach you about bias and make sure you're not completing the picture before you have all the facts. And in this case, the facts would be connecting sides. So what I say is, and one of the things that, you know, we also talked about in Action Academy is think like a juror. Bias has its evolutionary benefits, but it's not the way to consume information in this environment, right? So you have to think like a juror. You have to check your own implicit biases and stereotypes, because disinformation, it seeks to prey on them. It seeks to hit you with the confirmation bias, especially if you have these preconceived notions The algorithm will feed you in that social media platform. It'll feed you what you are used to seeing and what you've agreed with in the past. So if we can check ourselves to more effectively assess this information, then we can be better news consumers ourselves, so that we don't fall for, hoaxes or disinformation, and then we can get out there and actually be effective anti-disinformation advocates in our own right. But first, we got to check ourselves. So these are some of the tactics I suggest using, and we suggest using is, don't jump to conclusions, fact check claims from multiple sources, credible sources that you believe have a history and a past of getting things right. The Rantt Media media bias chart essentially paints out bias, and it does a good job of that. And recognize when algorithms are manipulating you. That's something you really have to pay attention to. And I know Blossom, in some of our past meetings, she has discussed about how she noticed how the TikTok algorithm was working. And, and that's really what, once you notice how it's working, that's the first step in preventing it from pulling you down rabbit holes. I've, been on TikTok, and it'll start pulling you down places you don't want to go. Like I remember back when Andrew Tate was going viral every other day on TikTok before he got arrested. And you stay on one podcast for too long, one bro podcast, and the next thing you know, your algorithm is feeding you misogynist content, right? So understand the algorithm, and then that's the first step to preventing it from manipulating you. And yeah, that's how we do it. And Mark says he failed for the triangle thing. This is how he this image is, or this screen is essentially what he tries to live by. This slide, I believe this might be what he's trying to say. These are the tactics he tries to use while reading online. And does anybody have any questions? Any new people? Just want to hear from some of the other people in the audience. Anybody have any questions on this slide, what we've thought of talk about so far? Anything you want to throw in the Zoom chat or pop up and say? Yeah, so yeah, Larcy, do you want to unmute and ask that? I didn't know what
Yeah,
you...
I pressed the enter button a little too quickly there. So like usually you say, you say like, oh, okay, well, I've been caught in this algorithm rabbit hole, right? And so, for example, right, I was looking at like cooking DIYs or something, and all of a sudden I started to see this. Like, at what point do you think is a good number to check? To say, hey, this is the third time I've seen this piece of content. This is the fourth time I've seen this piece of content, to just be like bunnies, so that way you get into the practice of switching, not necessarily like, yeah, you like the content also, but to get you into the practice of breaking it is you say, if I've seen this content 5 times already, I got to switch it to something else. So you can train yourself how and when to switch. What is that number for you?
I would put it even lower. I'd put it at 3. I would say if you are in it, like on a TikTok especially, and you 3 in a row, you start getting something that's clearly trying to push you down a rabbit hole. You see the same content over and over again that you don't want to see. Do what you can to tell the algorithm you don't want to see this. There are options you can click an option and say, I don't want to see this content, or this content wasn't relevant to me. And I think there's also the fact that you can also just skip by it. So TikTok analyzes especially how your scroll speed and how long you stay, and where your thumb is placed. I heard from someone who's worked closely with the tech, where your thumb is placed on the screen. So if you're seeing content you don't like 3 times in a row and it's feeding you, scroll beyond it, hit, if you're on Instagram or Twitter, yes, Christina's right. You can also tell the device to ignore this content, or tell this ad you don't like it, and then it'll begin to erode it. Because as we see, if you're using a device, if you're let's say you're Googling something, your cookies are being tracked. And if you give your app, cookies are, the technology in browsers that enable you to your behavior and your history to be tracked and what you're doing on the web. And if you give certain apps access to that, they're able to then, that's why it seems like it's reading your mind, or some things are meant to be, when it's actually just the gathering of your data to feed you this. So great question, Larcy. And you're right, Stacy as well. You know, all people of all ages need to pay attention to the ChatGPT phenomenon and AI chatbot impact as we move forward. But I'm going to go ahead and just move on to the next slide, because we got a little bit more to go here, and want to keep it between, you know, the hour and hour 30, you know, mark, because I've been here for an hour and you all been here with me, so thank you know with us. So thanks for sticking it through so far. But we got some cool exercises ahead of us here, and right now I want you all to rate your ability to tell facts from lies on a scale of 1 to 10, and then send it in the Zoom chat. So yes, Kyra's right. All this content will be on the cp.io space, and it'll be on the website. It'll be recorded. We'll make it available on the website too, so you can come back through it all. So, all right, we got some people in here. Okay, feeling very confident. We got some 7s. Blossom with a very specific 7.3. So that's good. A little bit above the 7. We got some 8s. Okay. Christina on a 4. All right, you know, honesty. Honesty is good. All right. So yeah, as you're sending these in, there's a study done by Michael Thaler, who is a professor, and he found that people often overestimate their ability to tell fact from fiction, and they also tend to overestimate the truth from sources and content they agree with, and they underestimate the truth in sources and content they disagree with. Maybe you see you moved yours down to 6.5. Well, we're all about to test this too, the exercise next, so we'll all see where everybody stands at. But like, yeah, it's really, you never know. I've fallen for stuff too, and in the next session we're going to talk about, you know, when some things we've fallen for. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the time we overestimate our ability. I've overestimated my ability many times before on this, and sometimes I've underestimated it. But anyone from any side of the political spectrum can fall for things, and a lot of time well-meaning people who are just being fed something that feeds their confirmation bias might fall, you know, become susceptible to this kind of information. So all great answers. Love the honesty. You know, no one gave themselves 10. No one was coming out here saying I'm on some 10. Like, you can't. So we'll see. We're about to test some of this. We're gonna see where some of y'all are at. Where all of us are at, actually. So there's this tweet here. Now, actually, before I even go further, do you guys want to throw something in the chat to see whether or not this is you all think this is real or fake? Let's do that. Send it in the chat and say if you think it's real or fake. Marjorie Taylor Greene is known for controversial posts. So send if you think that this tweet is fake. Everyone can send it in and guess if it's real, or if it happened. Man, he's begging for this to be fake. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, y'all are right. You are right. And that's you're proving your high scores from the last slide. You know, as wild as, you know, even if you have someone who has a history of saying wild things, you can't jump to a conclusion based off of that before. So this is actually a viral tweet that went, viral screenshot of a tweet that went viral in 2022, July 4th. It was, you know, just, it was plainly ridiculous. But because of the person's history of saying ridiculous things, people believed it, and it got traction in some circles online. And, you know, I know some of you might be surprised I chose this kind of example as opposed to one from a different political stripe, but it just goes to show you that really anyone from any background has a capacity to be misled, depending on how much their confirmation bias is being, you know, being essentially exploited or not. And so fortunately, this was a fake tweet. She never sent this. There was no evidence of it. But she has said things. She has talked about Jewish space lasers in the past. So it's not far-fetched to believe that this was true. So that's just an example right there. And one of the things I want to do here is do a little bit of an exercise here, where we're just going to rate some headlines and statements that I throw into the chat, just a few, to see if they are a big lie or a big fact. So what I'm going to do is grab a couple statements, headlines, and then you're just going to respond right in the chat and let me know. Okay, give me a second. Let's see if I can get this to cooperate with me.
Hey, Ahmed,
Okay.
do you want to stop sharing your screen and we can all do the activity with folks being
Yeah,
able
that's a good idea, because I honestly I also lost my chat screen. So yeah, everybody can come in here. We can, if you have video to share, we can all see each other's faces and react to some of this. That would be great. So yeah, we're just gonna do this little exercise here. Let me jump in. I'm gonna throw one in now, and then we can go ahead and just rate it as this is this statement a big lie or a big fact? Did this happen? Okay. Well, pretty much everyone said big lie, but Janet's like, I've heard this man say some things. And okay, we got Puya with a big fact. Got Amber with a big fact. We got a big truth from Andy. Okay. Yeah, it seems realistic, right? Okay, we got a correction from Andy here. All right, okay. You see? I mean, he said worse things. So I mean, I don't, it could be real. But it's false. He never called Joe Biden an ancient alien. He said worse things, but given his track record, you can't really blame anyone for believing if it's fact, right? But that's where, yeah, Puya, you're surprised. Like, I I get it, man, because it's how can you, from someone who's partaken in inciting an insurrection, it's kind of hard to really put anything past them at this point. But that's where that's where all those tactics come into play, right? Checking ourselves, making sure, okay, this sounds like something that could be said, but let me go Google and let me go cross-check a couple sources, and let me see if this was really said. And so that's one right there. All right, we're gonna do another one here from and what we'll do is we'll wait. Actually, no, everyone could just send it in right away as long as you feel it. Joe Biden once said Corn Pop was a bad dude and he ran a bunch of bad boys. Is this a big lie or is this a big fact? Okay, we got a big lie, we got a big true, we got a fact. All right. Feel free to say what you believe. It's a very split decision here. It could go either way. Was it a lie? Was it a lie or a fact? Who knows? So lie until proven more evidence. No, that's a good, Angie, that's a good place to be. Like, you need more evidence because not everyone knows who Corn Pop is. But I'll explain in a second. See, okay. All right, well, this statement is true. Joe Biden did say this. And it can be sometimes maybe it's might be hard to believe Joe Biden would say something like this, but basically, just to condense the story, yeah, corn pop does sound like a soda, but it was apparently also the name of a gang member. And there was this famous clip in 2019 of Joe Biden bragging about how he was a lifeguard in 1964 and kicked this gang leader Corn Pop out of the pool, and then like apparently faced off with him in the parking lot, and Corn Pop had a chain, and like Biden had a razor, and they got into some beef. And like it went viral because everybody was laughing at him and being like, this yeah, not a razor, right? Like, yeah, Biden was a tough dude, and he went hard, and he faced off gang leader Corn Pop, and he was telling the story to this all black audience, and it was just like, it was hilarious. This is back before anyone thought he'd win the primary. And then it turns out, some black people that were in that area were like, no, Corn Pop was a real dude. Corn Pop was a real dude. He was trouble. And it was a true statement. And apparently, yeah, so like, yeah, he was saying it to black people too. So it was funny. I encourage you all to watch the clip. It's worth a laugh. But yeah, so that's a true statement. And then we're gonna do one more here. And then for time's sake, gonna open up for some Q&A and stuff. But okay, we'll do one more. Is this true or not? Big fact or big lie. Tucker Carlson has run several news segments about how the green M&M isn't sexy anymore. Yeah, got some. Yeah, highly possible. It is possible. Yeah, there was a hashtag. It was true. It was true. This man, Tucker Carlson, was furious that Eminem decided to remove the boots, the stilettos on the green M&M, and replace them with more comfortable Adidas-like sneakers, so that Eminem could walk more comfortably. He didn't like that. He didn't think it was sexy enough. And then he ran multiple news segments, and it's really, yeah. So man, you heard this out in the wild. He's been running this segment, and that's why one of the reasons I chose this option is like, there are some things that hit your confirmation bias about someone and they're false. Where, for example, the Trump calling Biden an ancient alien because he has a history of saying things. The chat's out here killing me. But like, it's, there's some statements that confirm your biases and they're false. And then there are other statements that confirm your bias and they're true. And this is one of those that it's like, yep, he did that. And he repeatedly does it, and there'll probably be more. So definitely go look that up if you want to laugh. And he did it serious. It wasn't like it was a joke. He like did a serious like news bow tie news guy segment on that, and it was funny. So yeah, that is that. So before I go on back to the deck and kind of close out here for today, we could do some discussion, some Q&A. I think we have a little bit of time. Does anybody have any questions or what we covered so far that they want to weigh in on or discuss? You can raise your hand. Definitely want to hear from everybody. See if there's anyone new that hasn't been able to. So yeah, it's like with those exercises, it's you might find that like, oh wow, I didn't actually do as well as I thought, and there's no shade on that either. Like you some of these challenges are difficult, and there's so much information out there these days. The political sphere and the information sphere has gotten so ridiculous that it's hard to know what's real. You know, so it's hard to really grapple with, you know, grapple with these essential biases that we might have. For example, then Christina's tools to help people understand implicit biases. Yeah, there's definitely ways in which, you know, I'd say definitely using the slide we covered and checking yourself and making sure that you know, everyone has some form of implicit bias, whether it's based off your prior experiences, whether it's based off your parenting and conditioning. And I definitely think that there's ways to do that, but I want to jump quickly to Angie, do you want to raise your hand and answer and ask and or unmute?
Yeah, so I'm a PR major, and a lot of the things that we're looking at is like case studies about certain like brands and certain products that, and you know, you can go whichever way, you can choose your, you know, your medium and what you want to talk about. But yeah, like I was like, you were talking about that representative that does say outlandish things, but when that tweet had gone really I forgot the word, but it was, you know, tweeted a lot. Like, how does she recover from that? Or like, have you seen, like, during your analysis of the Trump era, how have you seen him try to recover or not? Yeah, that's my question.
That's a good question. And unfortunately, for a lot of these types of figures, they thrive on that and they don't seek to recover. They double down and they might spread more outlandish claims, even if there was something that was spread that was false. A lot of the times, what they might do, for example, with the Marjorie Taylor Greene thing, or some things that have gone viral that were false about Trump as well, is they will then use that as an example of how their critics get things wrong and how their critics spread false information about them. So it's another reason, in their words, it's another reason not to believe their critics. It's another reason why everything that's negative about them is fake news. So what they actually do when their critics or their opposition makes an honest mistake, they take that one mistake and they use it and they exploit it and they say, this is why everything that they post or every news org, yes, denial and projection. They deny and then they project and say it's all lies. And there's one of the reasons why figures like Donald Trump and some other entities and other people in political life go straight for the media first, go straight for credible sources to undermine them to their supporters so that they can continue to get away with lies. So that's spot on, Angie. Basically, the way they try to recover is they double down, but then they take this piece of information and then try to use it to discredit all of their critics so that they can keep lying and get away with it. So good question. Yeah. Okay, so Sasha, are we good on time? Is this I'm not sure if we're good on time to do a few more questions, or what do you think? Start to wrap up?
Yeah, let's start to wrap up. But if there's one more question that someone has, a burning question, please do ask. But then, yeah, otherwise you can, if you like, you can share that last slide and talk about what we are going to prepare for in terms of next time.
Yeah, so first off, thank you all for sitting through this in the evening. Well, for me, I'm over, it's 8 p.m. now. I've been turned up off the green tea over here to stay awake with you all over there on the West Coast. But thank you for being with us here today. And obviously keep up with us on social media. Recordings of this lecture will be available on commonpower.io, cpfuture.org. You can go back and rewatch it if you want to relive this awesome experience that we all had together. And then there's, most importantly, there's a Twitter space we're doing next week, Monday, at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Be on the lookout for, I'll be sending a tweet out tomorrow about it, and we'll be scheduling it, and then we can all hang out and have more casual conversation, go back and forth. Some of the ambassadors will be there. And obviously, part 2 of the lecture series will be the same time next Thursday. That's where we're really gonna get into the nitty-gritty, get into the tactics, dive into how Gen Z specifically has been impacted, and then the tools and the strategies we can use to effectively combat this disinformation ourselves. And then, and Christine, yeah, as you say, to talk about how Gen Z was impacted, that's what we're gonna hit next week. So also please hashtag big facts on social media, share this stuff. See, if you loved what you heard, bring more people, bring other Gen Z aspiring activists, or just anyone that's in Gen Z or younger person who really wants to get some of this information. Because next week we're getting into the tactics and the strategy of things you can really use out here in the real world. So that is that. Yeah.